It's me again. Diana Who. Hi. So I wanted to do a video about I didn't really want to do this video. um yeah. Anyway, okay, whatever. I keep thinking that it's egotistical and stupid. But I'm going to do it anyway. I was going to talk about the process I went through writing my memoir, Meta Was Here. I don't know if that's the title that the publisher went with ultimately. That was the title that I wanted, was Meta Was Here. About my what is it? The zombie apocalypse, my war with evil. This is water. Okay, so first of all, I don't want to sound pompous or pretentious or whatever. I'm going to try to avoid that. Okay, so I guess the first thing I would say is you have to understand my background, which is that I got my bachelor's degree in literature. I got a master's and master's degree in writing, just writing. And I got an MFA, Master's of Fine Arts, in fiction writing from NC State. I have been writing since I was like, I don't know, like 8, something like that. I was, interested in creating and being creative with words since I was little, since I was young. So writing, has always not just been something that was like inspirational or whatever, or an outlet to me. It was something that helped me process, helped me deal with, like traumas and just the stuff that you go through when you're growing up and life is, human beings are fucking awful. So when I was going through the worst crisis of my life in 2014, I had just been evicted from my apartment, sort of like I couldn't afford the rent anymore. So I decided to stop paying the rent. I decided I was going to leave. I couldn't pay the rent. I couldn't like pay up until I left, unfortunately, because I had to move and everything. And, and this was, of course, also when Jim Fuckwad was fucking up my life with his little cohort there. So I didn't have any money. I couldn't get employment anywhere. He had put fake convictions on my background check, which I later got $350 compensation for, like 2 years later, I think. Excuse me. So I didn't have any money. I couldn't get employment. So I had decided, I had written to my ex-husband and I had said, I'm in this situation and can I move back into the house for a little while? Okay, so that was where I was at this time. I was at the first lowest point of my life in the past 15 years. And I was still working part-time doing the freelance editing thing for iUniverse, but it hadn't turned into a full-time kind of income yet. And I was dealing with these people who were chasing me everywhere that I went and harassing me everywhere that I went and getting like the management to harass me all the time. And the whole entire community seemed to have turned on yours truly. I took my daughter and my dog and I went to a place that I felt was safer. And so I was there. I was there May 2014, and I was situating myself there, and the implant started. Jim Fuckwad started to use the implant. Almost immediately, by the way, after I was back in the house. Um and then, and I think it's getting hazy now because we're talking about 12 years ago, and a lot of fucking shit has happened since then. But I believe that it was about 2 or 3 months into dealing with the implant that I started to write my memoir. I had learned previously while I was still in my apartment that anything digital was being read by other people, probably multiple, possibly hundreds of other people. So if I wanted to keep anything private and secret, I definitely could not put it in my computer. So I decided to write it longhand in spiral notebooks. Okay, so that's how that idea was born. I started writing, in the 80s, probably like the early, like 1983 or 1984, something like that. I started journaling, but also starting to try to write narratives and poetry and stuff. So I learned with a pen, on paper. We did have a typewriter. We had an electric typewriter, and in elementary school, I did write a couple papers. I know it's like crazy for the kids, probably. I did write a couple papers in elementary school on the typewriter. I didn't get my first computer until I believe it was 1994, if I'm remembering that correctly. And it did not connect to the internet. It just was for me to like do schoolwork on. And we had a dot matrix printer. Those things were a fucking nightmare. Anyway, and then, okay, so I'm gonna get back on track. So my point being that, like I learned from a young age to write with a pen. And I also believe even today that one of the awesome things about choosing writing these days is that unlike, a DJ or a filmmaker or, whatever, artist, art painter, sculptor, like all you need to write is a pen, and it could be a cheap like $1.50 free pen from the bank or a hotel. I know, I always take them. I just do. I'm sorry. I don't know if it's wrong. I'm not sure. But anyway, I use them anyway. But all it takes is one of those pens and some paper. And you don't even need paper. I mean, like, look at the, cavemen. But anyway, so, you don't need a lot of money to be able to do it. Okay, hold on. I need water again. This is taking so much time. Oh my God. Okay, so that's why I started writing it longhand, because I did not want whoever it was that was reading everything that I put on my computer to read the book that I was writing about what they were doing to me. So I just got a pile of spiral notebooks, for like $1 each from, wherever the fuck. And I wrote my memoir. So, okay, so I think it was in June. I'm not 100%. It was either June or July. I started writing. And I believe that the first thing I wrote was about fuckwad tickling my heels, because it was a spot that I really did not ever want to be touched at all, which he found out by doing that. And then so when he found out that I hated it so much, he wanted to do it all the fucking time for like, what was it? 3 years, I think. maybe. Anyway, to the point where I was like considering slicing off my heels. Like, that makes any rational sense at all? Oh, yeah, that's gonna fix the problem, Diana. You know what I mean? Anyway, so okay. So that's where I was, that's like where I was heading at that time, because he was starting already to completely drive me crazy with it. It was like in May, shortly after I moved back into the house, he did a few stings of my left foot, I think, or right. No, I think it was my right foot. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, it's bottom of my foot. And then more and more things like that happened. And it became like where he's raping my vagina right now, by the way. And it became where it was undeniable that it wasn't just organic. Like, it was obviously not organic because it was happening in patterns. This is what all the victims have gone through, by the way. Is, some of them probably had mental health issues and never figured out that it was an implant because they were, convinced that they were insane and imagining everything, which is exactly what fuckwad, is going for with all of us. But unfortunately for him, he's a fucking moron. So, okay, so I started writing it in like June or July. I first started writing about just the symptoms. I wasn't really sure like what it was going to be. I didn't know what I was starting. I didn't know if it was going to be a book. I kind of went into it like I need something to cope, so why not? Right? This is how I've coped through a lot of my life, is through writing. So I thought, even if it's completely unpublishable, even if it makes no sense, even if it's awful, like, who cares? Like, what the fuck? Let's do it. Let's go do it. What else are we doing right now? That's the attitude, though, that I went into it with. I just put pen to paper and I just started writing. And I guess let me interrupt here just to say that throughout my college career, like writing wise, my process has always kind of been where I go in with a kind of vague idea of a story or a character, and I start writing kind of impulsively, and then sometimes it fizzles out, and I lose it and I just give up on it, and I have like a ton of those somewhere. But then, of course, the other times it would grow into something that I couldn't look away from, and that's where it would go, is that I would end up just writing almost without sleeping for, like days. And then, with a short story, it would be maybe like 24 hours, maybe 12 hours even. I would just feverishly like put it down on paper. And my revision process was always very minimal. I'm not a big reviser. I do believe in editing. I believe in like, objective, like third party editing very much. But revising wise, usually what I have put down on paper, I'm pretty happy with. It obviously needs to be cleaned up and shaped a little bit, but oftentimes I'm not moving things around a lot. Like, I don't do that kind of stuff. I kind of have it in my head when I'm, it's like it sort of like comes to life in my head as I'm creating it. And I know exactly where everything's going to go, and I know where it's going to end. And really, that's what happens, is it just kind of like lays out before me. I know that sounds like magical and fantastical, but that is actually what happens inside my brain. I don't know why. So, and the reason I say that is because with my memoir, it was basically the same, but I had written a novel before. I was going to say I never wrote a book before, but I'd written a novel in like maybe 2002, 2003. And if I read it now, I would just be like, oh my God, oh my God. I'd be like so embarrassed. But at the time, it meant a lot to me, I was under 30. People in their 20s are stupid. I'm sorry, you guys. It's just true. But anyway, but still, at the same time, in your 20s, you are sort of like facing your mortality. It's like kind of the phase that you go through at that age. And that's really what that was about. And I was like, grappling with like my upbringing and whatever, what everybody does in their 20s. Anyway, so I had written a novel in my 20s, and and it was the same kind of process. That was where like I was writing for days. And then I would take breaks, but then as I was building to the end, it's kind of like I get obsessive. I'm kind of an obsessive kind of person. And I get like where I need to finish it. Like I won't be able to settle and relax until I get it all out on paper. So I did that with that. I do that with basically everything. I think maybe that's part of the reason why I gravitated to short fiction so much, was because my process is somewhat torturous. I started the book, like the first few pages, talking about like the heel tickling, the implant. And what was crazy about it is, like sometimes as a writer, if you're a writer, that like sometimes you're writing something, you have a sort of idea, and it just like, you just are like, oh my God, this is like a waste of time. It's stupid. Like, I don't know what the hell I was thinking. You know what I mean? And I expected that to happen with this, but it just did not. It just kept going. There was so much. It was like, even at that early time, I had already experienced so much emotional shock, and trauma, that I had all this stuff like suppressed that kind of just wanted to pour out of me. And at first, I'll be honest, it was kind of like a journal entry. And like, I've been an editor at literary magazines, and I understand that it's really fucking annoying when you get a manuscript where it's just somebody like writing a journal entry. Like, that is the most fucking annoying thing. And the whole, I'm sorry, you guys, but it's like, oh my God, like nobody cares. Anyway, so it's like unpublishable. You know what I mean? Anyway, so it started out that way. It started out like sort of a confessional, and then I guess it's so long ago now, but then I guess, I just kind of was like, okay, this actually means something to me. So I need to figure out like what the structure is. Like, where are we going? What is this? And I don't think it was quite that conscientious, but I don't think I was quite that cognizant, I guess I should say, of the process. But I just decided that, I think I kept thinking to myself that it reminded me so much, like what I was going through then reminded me so much of when I was in 7th grade, when I entered junior high school, and my sister left for college at the same time. And just like 3 years later, mom left to do her thing, and she was gone for like 3 years. It reminded me, the isolation of it, and the terror, which is what it felt like in 7th grade. A lot of kids, I'm sure, can relate to that. And a lot of adults who've been through that can relate to that. But it was real terror, because these were adults, big adults with cars and money and tech knowledge that was so new at the time. They were armed with a lot of things that somebody like me had no way of battling, and I knew there were people, at least one person, I didn't know who they were, that was threatening to kidnap my child and murder me, murder her, murder everybody I cared about. So, as an adult experience, it felt a lot like what it was like at 12 when I was entering 7th grade. It was a crisis. I was in crisis. Um, so since that I made that association in my mind consciously at the time, I kind of just drifted back to that time, and I decided that I was going to parallel the two stories because they related to each other and they were similar. And I'm not going to cry right now. So don't think that I'm going to cry because I'm not. I need water. I guess, okay, so I did feel a little bit uncertain about sort of telling somebody else's story. Um, in the end, I kind of decided that I really thought that she wouldn't care. Um, and also, I really felt that I was kind of giving her love and nurturing by telling that story that she didn't really have when she was a child. And I'm not trying to make too much of what I did or, or whatever. Like, it's a totally selfless act because obviously it's not. It's completely egotistical to write a book, even just for starters, but, and especially to tell somebody else's story. I really felt that I was paying homage to her. I really truly did. So, ultimately I decided it was okay. I figured that if, like if it went to a publisher, that they would obviously reach out to her and make sure that she was okay with that or something like that. Anyway, I don't know what they do. I never had the opportunity to actually speak with the company that published my book. So, because I guess I'm living in the 18th century when women had no fucking rights at all. And also, it really ultimately is more, it really truly is more a story about my journey and my discovery being her best friend and what it was like to know somebody who was going through the things that she was going through, and when I cared about her so much. And so just the conclusion of that is just that I felt that I was paying homage to her, so I felt okay about it. um I don't know if that was the right decision or not. I really can't say. So that the same process that always happened to me, with my writing happened with that memoir too. And that's why I wrote it in 9 months, was because once, it took a few months for me to really get like where there was momentum happening. I think it was probably like 3 months, but when I hit that point, and I wish I could remember what part in the story that happened, but um of course you have to realize I wrote it mostly chronologically, it wasn't like a film where they shoot the last scene, first, and then they shoot the fifth scene like second. It wasn't like that. I wrote it like linear. Like I just was telling the story in my head, and I was writing it down as I was doing that. So which really gave me a chance to emotionally, psychologically kind of relive that stuff and really go through it as it happened, both present and past. And the present stuff at that time was so hazy, it was so emotionally charged, that that's why there's so little of that. I mean, if you look in that book, like I don't know what the final copy looks like, but I know how much stuff I wrote about the present time then, and it wasn't very much. I know that it's really not very much. The bulk of the book is like the distant past. I need more water. Sorry. And I think that's just because it was too close. It was just way too close at that time. It was too raw. It was still happening. It was still happening. In reliving it, I processed a lot of stuff, but from then, not from the present to the present time. The present time, like, which is basically starting 2013, like that's still locked inside somewhere. I don't, maybe the FBI is going to dig that out. I'm not sure. They're probably going to have to get a hypnotherapist for some of it because we're talking about like 13 years ago. But anyway, so, okay, so I guess basically that's what I wanted to say is like, the momentum picked up and picked up and picked up from like the probably third or fourth month, until the end. And then I just was like flying until the end. I just couldn't, every moment that I couldn't be with my notebook was like agony, like I couldn't wait to get back to, I was like sitting in the carpool lane waiting for Maya to come out of school while I was like feverishly writing. Um, And I actually, it's funny actually. I finished the first draft in a spiral notebook while I was sitting in the carpool lane at York Elementary waiting for Maya to come out. I wrote the last words of that book while I was sitting in the carpool lane, and I was crying. It made me cry. I actually wept a little bit when I wrote that. And the scene was, I don't know how the final copy ends. The scene was um where she and I see each other again, my friend whose name I'm not going to say, where we see each other again a few years, after we haven't talked or however long it was, when I was like, I think 17 or 18 and she was too, and she'd already had her daughter, for a while. And um because that meeting in reality was more awkward probably than I wrote it, because in retrospect I understand how significant that last meeting was, because I think I've only seen her once since then. Fucking Christ, I don't want to cry. Okay, so once it was typed, I did move things around a little bit. I got rid of a lot of stuff. And I did a few revisions. Basically, I was completely done with that book in like 9 months. In 2015, like the spring of 2015. I think I did go back in to revise once or twice more, but they were brief stints, and I think ultimately I felt that the changes I made were bad and unnecessary. So I'm not a big reviser, like I said. What I struggled with, this is where I'm going to end it, I guess, is what I struggled with was whether to put things like the Boston Marathon bombing in there, which was really the first thing that made it obvious to me that I was in danger and that Maya was in danger and that it was serious. I struggled with that and other stuff because by that time already, my sister had accused me of being schizophrenic and paranoid. What the fuck was my point? Oh, right, the stuff that I struggled, with. Yeah, so, right, I didn't want to put a lot of stuff in that, somebody could say, like, a schizophrenic is having hallucinations or whatever. So I was terrified about that. Because you have to understand that, I was terrified. Like, my ex-husband fucking hated me. Even though I was living in his house, he hated me. And I was terrified that I was going to lose custody of her altogether. I was so scared of that. I was really, really scared that, I was going to end up being a total failure as a mother and losing custody of her and like never seeing her again, So I really went back and forth with what to include in that in the final digital manuscript. I think in the final revision I did, and I can't say when that was, it was probably maybe like a year later. I decided that I had to put it back in. I was submitting I was submitting queries to agents. I think that was part of it. And some of them were asking to see pages, and I was giving them pages, and Um, I don't know. I was trying to hit the sensational, nerve a little bit, which is kind of gross, I guess. But I was so desperate for money. I wanted to get the fuck out of my ex-husband's house. You know what I mean? And I was in such a terrible situation. I couldn't just get a regular job. I was being fucking harassed everywhere. Okay, so I guess that's it. I don't know. So in the final draft that I produced, the final one that I saved, the last one, had that in it. I'm sure it did. It had the Boston Marathon bombing in it and like a lot of the other stuff. I just decided to totally come clean. I was like, my life is never going to get better if I don't start screaming in my own defense. So that was what I did. Whether people, yeah, however it lands, whatever it turns into, it's what I had to do. That's what I did. So that was what I did. And I started sending it to agents, and I got rejected by every single one of them. And that was when I knew that whoever it was that was controlling my world was never going to let me publish that book. So that's pretty much it. I hope this is interesting to somebody. I don't know if it is. Okay, bye.